She called him a failure at 32,000 feet, mocked his second-hand clothes, his struggling son, his cheap dreams. Then the plane's engines screamed, the captain's voice cracked with terror, and the woman who'd spent an hour destroying him realized that the truck driver in seat 2B was the only thing standing between her and destruction. Welcome, beloved. Don't wait. Tap that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because tomorrow's story is even more breathtaking, and once it's live, you'll want to be the first to experience it. Let's make sure you don't miss a second of the magic. All right, let's begin. John Luke's credit card was declined 3 times before it finally went through for the business class tickets. Standing at the San Francisco airport gate at 11:01 p.m., watching the numbers process on the screen, he'd felt his chest tighten with the kind of panic that had nothing to do with flying and everything to do with the $200 he'd just gambled on goodbye. Because that's what this trip was. A farewell tour for a 6-year-old who'd already lost his mother and was about to lose his grandmother. 3 days, the Montgomery doctors had said. Maybe 4, if she was strong. Owen needed to say goodbye, needed to see her one last time, needed something John couldn't give him. Closure. Daddy, my feet hurt. John looked down at his son, at those enormous brown eyes that held too much sadness for someone who still believed in Santa Claus. Owen's sneakers were too small, had been for 2 months, but new shoes meant skipping the electric bill, and you couldn't skip the electric bill in November. Not with a 6-year-old who was afraid of the dark. Just a little longer, little man. Once we're on the plane, you can take them off, okay? The boarding call came like a verdict. Pacific Airways Flight 447 to Montgomery, business class passengers may now board. The words felt like an accusation. Business class. John Luke, who drove a delivery truck 60 hours a week and still couldn't make rent on time. John Luke, who'd once been Captain John Falcon 6 Luke, who'd flown $70 million fighter jets and made split-second decisions that saved lives. That version of himself felt like a ghost now, something that had died the same day his wife had. They walked down the jetway, Owen's hand small and sweaty in his. The boy clutched his teddy bear, the one his mother had given him, the one that was falling apart at the seams because John couldn't sew worth a damn but kept trying anyway. Every stitch was crooked, every repair held together by determination rather than skill. The business class cabin smelled like leather and money, like a world John no longer belonged to. He found their row, 2A and 2B, and his stomach dropped when he saw who was sitting in 2A. The woman was perfect. That was the only word for it. Perfect hair, perfect suit, perfect manicure, perfect expression of contempt as she looked up from her phone and saw them approaching. She was the kind of beautiful that came from personal trainers and dermatologists, and never having to choose between eating and paying bills. "Excuse me," John said, his voice rougher than he intended. "That's our row." She stood, her movements elegant and slow, as if the very act of accommodating them was beneath her. John guided Owen into the window seat, trying not to notice how the woman's nose wrinkled as they passed, as if poverty had a smell she could detect. He buckled Owen in, hands moving with the practiced efficiency of 3 years of solo parenting. The boy was already shrinking into himself, that defensive curl of shoulders that broke John's heart every single time. Owen had learned to make himself small in a world that was too big and too loud and too full of people, like the woman sitting next to them. John pulled out their water bottle, refilled from an airport fountain because $6 for bottled water was highway robbery, and handed it to Owen. "Here you go, buddy. Remember, small sips. We've got a long flight." Owen took the bottle with both hands, and John saw his son's fingers trembling. The boy hated flying, hated the noise, the enclosed space, the feeling of being trapped. But they'd done this before, survived worse together. They'd survive this too. The plane began to fill, a parade of business travelers and holiday refugees, all of them looking exhausted and desperate in that particular way that happens on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. The engines started their low rumble, and Owen's grip on the water bottle tightened. "It's okay," John whispered. "Just like last time, remember? Loud at first, then smooth." You can even sleep if you want. But Owen wouldn't sleep. Owen never slept anymore. Not really. Just fitful hours interrupted by nightmares about his mother, about hospitals, about all the ways the world could take people away from you. The plane pushed back from the gate, that lurching sensation that made John's old instincts kick in, his body remembering the feel of a jet engine, the physics of lift and thrust and drag. 3 years since he'd resigned his commission. 3 years since he'd walked away from the only thing he'd ever been truly good at. Some days it felt like 3 lifetimes. Owen's hands were shaking now, trembling around the plastic bottle as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. John reached over, about to take the bottle, about to say something comforting, when it happened. The bottle slipped from Owen's small fingers like water through a net. It hit the tray table with a sharp crack, the lid popping off, water erupting in every direction. Owen's lap, the seat, the floor, a wave of it heading straight for the woman in 2A's designer heels. No, no, no! Owen's voice cracked, climbing toward hysteria. John moved on instinct, grabbing napkins, trying to dam the flood with inadequate paper, but the water kept coming, kept spreading, kept turning this moment into exactly the kind of public disaster he'd been dreading. "It's okay, it was an accident," John said, his voice low and steady even as his heart hammered. "Owen, buddy, look at me. It's okay, you're okay." But Owen wasn't okay. His face was red, his breathing coming in sharp gasps, tears already spilling down his cheeks. And the woman in 2A, she made a sound, a laugh, sharp and cruel and loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." John's hands froze on the napkins. His son's humiliation was a physical thing, something he could feel radiating off the small body pressed against his side. 3 years of protecting Owen from the world's cruelty, and here it was anyway, mocking them at 32,000 feet. He looked up at the woman, and something old and dangerous stirred in his chest, something that remembered what it felt like to have power, to command respect, to be more than just a failure mopping up spills in business class. But he swallowed it down. Because that's what fathers did. They swallowed their pride, their rage, their broken dreams. They smiled and apologized and made themselves small so their children didn't have to. "Sorry," John said quietly. "We'll clean it up." The woman's perfectly painted lips curved into something that might have been a smile if smiles were weapons. "I'm sure you will." The flight attendant appeared with a stack of towels, her smile strained in that way service workers perfected after too many entitled passengers. She was young, maybe 25, with kind eyes that flickered between John's obvious distress and the woman in 2A's obvious disdain. "Here you go, sir. I'm so sorry about that. These things happen." "Thank you," John said, taking the towels and immediately pressing them into Owen's lap, trying to soak up the water before it spread further. His son was still breathing in those short, panicked gasps that meant a meltdown was seconds away. "Hey, hey," John whispered, abandoning the cleanup to cup Owen's face in his hands. "Look at me, little man. Big breath in through your nose. Hold it. Now out through your mouth, just like Mommy taught us, remember?" Owen tried. His small chest hitched as he struggled to control his breathing, tears streaming down his cheeks. Around them, passengers were settling in, some pretending not to notice, others watching with varying degrees of sympathy and irritation. John felt their stares like physical weight. "I'm sorry, Daddy," Owen whispered. "I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to. I know, buddy. It was an accident. Accidents happen. You're okay." "Actually," the woman in 2A said, her voice cutting through their moment like a blade, "this is exactly the problem." John's jaw clenched. He didn't look at her, couldn't, because if he looked at her, he might say something he couldn't take back, and Owen was already upset enough without watching his father lose control. But the woman wasn't finished. "You're teaching him that mistakes don't have consequences, that it's perfectly acceptable to be unprepared, to lack basic supervision skills." She gestured vaguely at Owen with one perfectly manicured hand. "That child is clearly not ready for public spaces, let alone business class." The flight attendant's eyes went wide. "Ma'am, I don't think—" "Business class," the woman continued, her voice rising just enough to carry to the rows behind them, "is supposed to be a refuge from this sort of chaos. I paid $2,400 for this seat. $2,400. And now I'm sitting in a puddle because someone thought bringing an uncontrolled child into a premium cabin was appropriate." John finally looked at her, really looked at her. She was maybe 45, with the kind of ageless face that came from expensive procedures and zero laugh lines, because nothing was ever funny enough to warrant genuine emotion. Her suit was charcoal gray, tailored, probably cost more than John made in a month. Her eyes were the color of ice, and just as warm. "He's 6, John said quietly. His voice was level, controlled, the same tone he'd used when reporting engine failures to air traffic control. "He spilled water. That's what 6-year-olds do sometimes." "And that's precisely the problem," she said, turning in her seat to face him fully. "Participation trophy parenting. No standards, no expectations, just endless excuses and coddling. That child needs structure, discipline. He needs to learn that actions have consequences." Owen made a small sound, something between a whimper and a gasp, and pressed his face harder against John's shoulder. John felt his son's small body trembling, felt the wetness of tears soaking through his shirt. Something cold and hard settled in John's chest. It was the same feeling he'd had over Kandahar when his wingman's jet had taken fire. A crystalline clarity, a perfect understanding of exactly how much danger he was in, and exactly what needed to be done about it. "Ma'am?" The flight attendant tried again, her voice tight. "Perhaps I could find you another seat." "I don't want another seat," the woman interrupted. "I want the seat I paid for. What I don't want is to spend the next 4 hours sitting next to someone who clearly can't afford business class and brought their inadequately supervised child along for the ride." The cabin had gone quiet. Not completely. The engines were still rumbling, announcements still playing overhead, but quiet enough that everyone nearby could hear. Quiet enough that a businessman across the aisle was watching with undisguised interest. Quiet enough that an elderly woman 2 rows back was shaking her head in disgust. John felt Owen's fingers digging into his arm, small and desperate and trusting. His son believed he could fix this, believed his father could make the mean lady stop, could make everything okay, could save them from this humiliation the same way he'd once saved nations. But John couldn't save them from this, couldn't save them from being poor, from being out of place, from being the kind of people that women like this looked through as if they were glass. "Let me guess," the woman said, examining her phone screen now, as if this conversation was barely worth her attention. "You thought business class would be a nice treat? A little splurge? Something special for your boy?" She glanced at John's jacket, the navy surplus with the worn elbows, and her lip curled. "You probably can't even afford these seats. Credit card, right? Maxed out for a flight you have no business taking?" John's hands tightened on the towels. She wasn't wrong. She was cruel, vicious, the kind of person who found other people's struggles entertaining, but she wasn't wrong about the credit card, wasn't wrong about the splurge, wasn't wrong about any of it. "My daddy can afford anything," Owen said suddenly, his voice small but fierce as he lifted his head from John's shoulder. His face was red and tear-streaked, but his eyes blazed with the kind of loyalty that only children possessed. "He's the bravest person in the whole world. He saves people." The woman laughed. It was a terrible sound, crystalline and sharp, like breaking glass. "Does he now? And what exactly does your brave daddy do? Let me guess. Security guard? Mall cop?" Owen's face crumpled. "He drives a truck." The words hung in the air between them, an admission, an accusation, a surrender. John felt his son's shame like a physical blow, felt the way Owen's small body seemed to collapse inward, making himself smaller, trying to disappear. "There it is," the woman said, turning back to her phone with a smile of satisfaction. "A truck driver in business class. The American dream really has lowered its standards, hasn't it?" John opened his mouth. He didn't know what he was going to say, didn't know if he was going to defend himself, apologize, or tell this woman exactly what he thought of people who built their self-worth by destroying others. His voice was already forming the words when the plane lurched, not turbulence, something else, something wrong. The lurch came again, harder this time, a violent shudder that rattled through the airframe like a living thing. John's body reacted before his mind could catch up, every instinct from 1,000 hours in the cockpit screaming that something was catastrophically wrong. Around them, passengers gasped. Someone's laptop slid off a tray table. A flight attendant grabbed the nearest seat back to steady herself. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Anderson. We're experiencing some minor turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." But John heard what the captain wasn't saying. Heard it in the slight tremor beneath the professional calm, in the way the engines sounded just fractionally off, in the way the aircraft was behaving like something with a mind of its own. He reached over and tightened Owen's seatbelt, his movements automatic and precise. "Daddy?" Owen's voice was small, all the earlier defiance gone. "It's okay, buddy. Just some bumps. Hold on to your teddy bear." The woman in 2A had gone pale, her phone forgotten in her lap. She gripped the armrest between them, her knuckles white. "This is normal, right? This is just turbulence?" John didn't answer, because it wasn't normal. The way the plane was moving, that wasn't weather. That was mechanical failure, and from the feel of it, something major. The aircraft dropped. Not a dip, a drop. A sickening stomach-in-your-throat plunge that sent unsecured items flying toward the ceiling. Coffee cups, purses, someone's tablet sailing past like a missile. The overhead bins burst open, luggage raining down. Screams erupted from every direction. The oxygen masks deployed with a hiss of compressed air, yellow cups dangling like nooses in front of every seat. "Oh God," the woman in 2A whispered. "Oh God, oh God." John was already moving, grabbing Owen's mask, pulling it over his son's face even as the boy began to scream. "Breathe, Owen. Just breathe. I've got you." The cabin lights flickered, once, twice, then settled into that sickly amber glow that every frequent flyer recognized as emergency lighting. The kind of light that meant the backup systems had kicked in. The kind of light that meant the primary systems had failed. Around them, chaos. Pure, primal chaos. A man 2 rows back was crying, clutching his rosary. A woman across the aisle was screaming for her children who were seated somewhere behind her. The businessman who'd been watching their earlier confrontation was frantically trying to call someone, his phone pressed to his ear as if cell service at 32,000 feet was going to save him. The woman in 2A sat frozen, her oxygen mask hanging in front of her face, forgotten. She was staring straight ahead, her perfectly made-up face a mask of terror. "Put your mask on," John said. She didn't move, didn't blink. Shock, his mind supplied. She's going into shock. "Put your mask on," he repeated louder this time. Still nothing. John reached over and grabbed the mask, pulling it toward her face. She flinched but didn't resist as he fitted it over her nose and mouth, his movements efficient and impersonal. The intercom crackled. Static. The sound of someone breathing hard. Then Captain Anderson's voice, and this time there was no professional calm, no reassuring tone. This was the voice of a man who'd looked death in the face and knew he was losing. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain." A pause, the sound of alarms shrieking in the cockpit. "We've lost our primary and secondary hydraulic systems. We have no aileron control, limited elevator authority. I need everyone to brace for emergency procedures. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin." The screaming intensified. The man with the rosary was praying in Spanish, the words tumbling over each other. Somewhere behind them, someone was vomiting. The smell of fear, sweat and adrenaline, and the metallic tang of panic filled the cabin. John looked down at Owen. His son's eyes were huge behind the oxygen mask, darting around the cabin, trying to make sense of the chaos. Those small hands were clutching the teddy bear so hard the remaining stuffing was bulging out around the seams. "Listen to me," John said, pulling Owen's face toward him, forcing his son to focus. "Listen, we're going to be okay. Do you hear me? We're going to be okay." Owen nodded, but tears were streaming down his face, soaking into the mask. The captain's voice came back on, even more strained. "We're at 32,000 feet. I'm trying to level us out, but I've got no hydraulic pressure, no flight control authority. If there is anyone on board, anyone at all, with military flight experience, specifically high-performance aircraft, I need you in this cockpit right now. Silence. Not the chaos kind, the waiting kind, the holding your breath kind, the praying for a miracle kind. John felt it then. That old familiar pull. The call to duty that had defined his entire adult life until the day he'd walked away. He could see it so clearly, the cockpit in chaos, instruments screaming warnings, two pilots fighting a losing battle with an aircraft that had become a 150-ton brick falling from the sky. He could help. He knew he could help. Had done it before, had landed damaged aircraft in conditions that should have killed everyone on board. His call sign wasn't Falcon 6 because he was lucky. It was because he was good. Better than good. The best. But Owen. John looked at his son, 6 years old, already traumatized, already terrified of losing another parent. How could he leave him? How could he unbuckle this seatbelt, walk away, and leave his child alone with strangers while he tried to save a dying plane? Sir. The flight attendant was suddenly there, crouched in the aisle, her face pale but determined. Sir, do you have flight experience? The woman in 2A's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide behind the oxygen mask. John's mind raced. 186 people on this plane. 186 souls who would die if someone didn't do something. His son would die. Owen would die unless... Dad? Owen's voice was muffled by the mask, but clear enough. Dad, what's happening? John made his decision. He unbuckled his seatbelt. What are you doing? The woman in 2A's voice was sharp with panic. You can't... The seatbelt sign... John ignored her. He knelt in front of Owen, his hands steady, even as the aircraft shuddered around them. His son's eyes were wild with terror, but there was something else there too, that absolute faith that only children had in their fathers. The belief that Dad could fix anything, save anyone, make the monsters go away. Owen, listen to me very carefully. John kept his voice low, calm, the same tone he'd used when tucking his son in at night after nightmares about his mother. Remember what Mommy used to say about Daddy's old job? Owen nodded, his small chest heaving. Remember how she said Daddy used to fly planes? Big planes? Fast planes? Another nod. Well, that job is why we're going to be okay. All these people are going to be okay, because I'm going to go help the pilots and I'm going to land this plane. He cupped Owen's face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears. But I need you to be brave for me. Can you do that? Don't leave me, Owen whispered, his voice breaking. Please don't leave me. The words were a knife in John's chest. Because that's what Owen feared most, being left behind. First his mother, now this. The boy had already lost too much. I'm not leaving you. I'm saving you. There's a difference. John forced a smile he didn't feel. I'll be right up there in the cockpit, and when we land, I'm going to come straight back here and give you the biggest hug you've ever had. Deal? Owen's lip trembled. Promise? I promise. John pulled his son close, oxygen mask and all, holding him for one precious second. Then he turned to the flight attendant. Stay with him. Don't leave him alone. Sir, I can't... That's an order. The authority in John's voice was absolute, the tone of a man who'd commanded squadrons and expected to be obeyed. The flight attendant's eyes widened, but she nodded and slid into John's vacated seat. John stood, and the transformation was instantaneous. The slouch vanished. The defeat evaporated. His shoulders went back, his chin came up, and every movement became precise and purposeful. This wasn't the rumpled single dad anymore. This was Captain John Falcon 6 Luke, and he'd been sleeping for 3 years. Now he was awake. Wait! The woman in 2A grabbed his arm, her grip desperate. You're actually a pilot? A real pilot? John looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then up at her face. She was terrified, mascara running, perfect composure shattered, reduced to the same primal fear as everyone else in this cabin. Ma'am, he said quietly, I suggest you put your head down and brace. This is going to get worse before it gets better. He pulled his arm free and strode toward the cockpit, past the collapsed flight attendant in the galley, who was sobbing into her hands, past the businessman who'd given up on his phone and was writing something on a napkin, probably a goodbye note to someone who'd never receive it, past the elderly woman clutching her rosary with arthritic fingers. The aircraft lurched again, harder this time, and John had to grab a seat back to keep his balance. The angle was wrong. They were descending too fast, the nose dropping in a way that spoke of complete hydraulic failure. Without control surfaces, the pilots were flying a brick. In maybe 10 minutes, that brick was going to hit the ground at 400 miles per hour and disintegrate into pieces too small to identify, unless someone did something. Falcon 6, reporting for duty, John said as he reached the cockpit door. His voice cut through the chaos like a blade, clear, authoritative, the kind of voice that made people stop screaming and start hoping. The remaining flight attendant, an older man with gray hair and steady hands, was already at the door. You have experience? FA-18 Super Hornet, 94 combat missions. I've landed damaged aircraft before. John met the man's eyes. Let me in. The door opened. The cockpit was chaos incarnate, warning lights blazing across every panel, alarms screaming from multiple systems, the master caution light flashing red like a heartbeat, and in the captain's seat, a man in his 50s with sweat streaming down his face, fighting a yoke that wasn't responding. "Who the hell are you?" Captain Anderson barked without looking back. "Captain John Luke, U.S. Navy, retired, FA-18 pilot." "What's your situation?" Anderson's head snapped around, and John saw the hope flare in his eyes before professional skepticism took over. "Can you fly commercial?" "I can fly anything with wings. Talk to me. What happened?" The first officer, younger, mid-30s, his hands trembling on the controls, spoke up. "Complete hydraulic failure. Both systems. We think it was a catastrophic line rupture in the tail section. We've got no ailerons, no rudder, minimal elevator control. We're essentially in a controlled fall. Altitude? 28,000 feet and dropping. Descent rate is 2,000 feet per minute and accelerating." John's mind was already calculating. 28,000 feet, 2,000 feet per minute. They had maybe 14 minutes before impact. 14 minutes to figure out how to land an aircraft with no flight controls. "Montgomery is 180 miles out," Anderson said. "But we'll never make it. We're going to have to put down in whatever's below us." He pulled up a terrain map. Rural Alabama, some farmland, some forests. "There's a stretch of highway, Route 65, about 40 miles from our current position." A highway. John leaned over the center console, studying the instruments. The hydraulic pressure gauges were both at 0. Backup systems offline. This wasn't just bad, this was catastrophic. "How long is the straightaway?" "Maybe 2 miles before it curves. We'd need to be perfect." "Then we'll be perfect." John looked at Anderson. "I need your seat." "This is my aircraft." "With respect, Captain, your aircraft is about to become a smoking hole in the ground with 186 people inside. I've landed jets with no hydraulics before." "Have you?" The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then Anderson unbuckled and stood. "She's yours, Captain." John slid into the captain's seat, and his hands found the controls like coming home. The yoke felt dead in John's hands. Not resistant, dead, like holding a piece of wood attached to nothing. Every pilot's nightmare, the controls that didn't control anything. "Talk to me about throttle response," John said, his eyes scanning the instrument panel. "Can you manipulate thrust independently?" "Yes," the first officer said. "Engines are responding normally. That's the only thing we've got." John's mind raced through the physics. No hydraulics meant no control surfaces, no ailerons to bank, no rudder to turn, no elevator to pitch. But they had engines, 2 powerful turbofans that could be used for asymmetric thrust. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't even good, but it was something. "What's your name?" John asked the first officer. "Mitchell, First Officer Tom Mitchell." "All right, Tom, here's what we're going to do. We're going to fly this aircraft using differential thrust. Left engine high, we bank right. Right engine high, we bank left. Both engines low, we descend slower. It's going to be rough, imprecise, and we'll have maybe one shot at this landing. Mitchell's voice cracked. I've never done anything like this. I have. John's hands were already moving across the throttle controls, testing the response. United 232, 1989. DC-10 lost all hydraulics over Iowa. The crew landed it using engine thrust alone. 185 people survived. We're going to do the same thing. United 232 crashed, Anderson said quietly from behind them. They crashed and burned on the runway, but 185 people walked away. That's 185 more than we'll walk away if we don't try. John adjusted the throttles minutely, feeling the aircraft's response. The nose came up slightly. Good. They had some pitch control. Mitchell, I need you on the throttles with me. When I call for thrust adjustments, you respond immediately. No hesitation, no second guessing. Understood? Understood. Captain Anderson, get on the radio. I need that highway cleared. I need every cop, every first responder, every person with a vehicle on Route 65 to get off that road in the next 10 minutes. And I need emergency services staged at both ends. Anderson was already reaching for the radio. Montgomery Center, this is Pacific 447 declaring emergency. We need immediate clearance of Highway 65 between mile markers 140 and 145. This is not a drill. We're attempting a highway landing. The radio crackled. Pacific 447, say again? We have complete hydraulic failure and are attempting an emergency landing on Highway 65. We need that road cleared now. A pause. Then, Pacific 447, Roger. Coordinating with state police. Be advised, you have approximately 12 minutes before you'll be below safe altitude for that location. 12 minutes. John looked at the altimeter. 24,000 feet. The descent rate had increased to 2,500 feet per minute. Simple math said they'd be on the ground, one way or another, in less than 10 minutes. Mitchell, increase thrust on engine 1 by 5%. Increasing thrust engine 1. The aircraft banked slightly to the right. Too much. John compensated with the opposite engine, feeling for the sweet spot. It was like trying to steer a car by leaning. Possible, but requiring constant adjustment. Good. Now bring both engines back to 70%. We need to slow this descent. The roar of the engines increased. The aircraft shuddered, fighting against aerodynamics and gravity. The descent rate decreased to 2,000 feet per minute. Better, but not enough. Behind them, Anderson was still on the radio. We need confirmation on road clearance. How much traffic are we looking at? State police report moderate traffic. They're setting up roadblocks at both ends now. ETA on full clearance is 8 minutes. 8 minutes. They'd be at 5,000 feet in 8 minutes. Too low for a normal approach, but they didn't have a choice. Captain Luke, Mitchell said, his voice tight. The passengers, they need to know what's happening. John glanced at the cabin door. Beyond it, 184 people waited in terror. His son waited in terror. He thought about Owen, small and alone except for a flight attendant who was probably just as scared as everyone else. Thought about Heather Johnson, the woman who'd spent the last hour destroying them, now realizing that the man she'd mocked was the only thing standing between her and death. Put me on the PA, John said. Anderson handed him the handset. John pressed the button, and his voice carried through the cabin, steady, calm, authoritative. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain John Luke. I've taken over flight controls from Captain Anderson. We have experienced a complete hydraulic failure, which means we cannot fly this aircraft using normal methods. However, I want you to know that I have experience in exactly this type of emergency. I've flown FA-18 fighters in combat, and I've dealt with worse situations than this and brought everyone home safely. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. In approximately 8 minutes, we're going to attempt an emergency landing on Highway 65 in rural Alabama. It's not going to be smooth, it's not going to be comfortable. But we are going to land this aircraft, and we are all going to walk away. I need everyone to follow your flight attendant's instructions exactly. Put your heads down, brace position, and stay braced until we come to a complete stop. Trust me. Trust your crew. We're going to get through this together. He released the button. 20,000 feet, Mitchell said. Descent rate still 2,000 feet per minute. John's hands moved across the throttles, making micro adjustments. The aircraft was responding, but sluggishly. Every input took 3 or 4 seconds to register, and by then, they'd already fallen hundreds of feet. Captain Anderson, I need eyes on that highway. Pull up whatever imagery you can find. I need to know about power lines, overpasses, anything that could kill us on approach. Anderson was already working. Pulling up satellite view now. Highway 65 between markers 140 and 145. He studied the screen. We've got a straight stretch, roughly 2 miles long, clear on both sides, farmland, some trees, but nothing immediately adjacent to the road. There's one overpass at the north end, but if we're landing south to north, we'll clear it. Wind? Winds are calm. 5 knots from the west. A small miracle. Landing on a highway with no controls in high winds would be suicide. 5 knots they could handle. 15,000 feet, Mitchell announced. His hands were shaking on the throttles. Stay with me, Tom. I need you focused. We're going to make it through this, but I need you sharp. I'm here. I'm with you. The aircraft shuddered again, a violent tremor that rattled through the airframe. Warning lights flashed. The stall indicator chirped once, twice. We're losing speed, Anderson said. Airspeed dropping to 220 knots. Too slow. They needed to maintain speed, or they'd drop like a stone. John increased thrust on both engines, feeling the aircraft strain against gravity's pull. Come on, he whispered. Come on. Stay with me. The radio crackled. Pacific 447. State Police report Highway 65 is clear. Repeat, highway is clear. Emergency services are standing by. Roger, Anderson replied, beginning final approach. 10,000 feet. The ground was visible now through the windscreen. Patchwork fields, dark forests, the thin ribbon of highway cutting through it all. Their target, their salvation, their only hope. John's entire world narrowed to this moment. The feel of the yoke in his hands, the sound of the engines, the numbers on the instruments. Everything else fell away, his past, his failures, his fears. There was only this. 186 people depending on him to do the impossible. 5,000 feet, Mitchell said. Descent rate 1,500 feet per minute. I see the highway, John said. There it was, a gray line in the gathering darkness. 2 miles of asphalt that had to be perfect. Beginning alignment. He adjusted thrust carefully, nudging the aircraft's nose toward the highway. The plane responded slowly, ponderously, like a whale trying to thread through a needle. 3,000 feet. Too far left, Anderson said. We're going to overshoot. I see it. John decreased thrust on the left engine, increased it on the right. The aircraft banked slightly. Not enough. He adjusted again, more aggressively this time. The aircraft responded, swinging toward the highway, but now they were descending too fast, the ground rushing up to meet them. 2,000 feet. Descent rate 2,000 feet per minute. We're coming in too hot, Mitchell said, his voice rising toward panic. Stay with me. John's hands were a blur on the throttles, adjusting, compensating, fighting for every foot of altitude. We can do this. 1,000 feet. The highway filled the windscreen now, impossibly narrow, impossibly short. He could see cars pulled off to the side, emergency vehicles with their lights flashing, people watching from the fields. 500 feet. John eased back both throttles, trying to slow their descent without stalling. The aircraft shuddered, fighting him. 300 feet. 200. Brace for impact, Anderson shouted into the PA. The highway rushed up to meet them. John's hands moved on instinct now, years of training taking over. He increased thrust slightly at the last second, trying to flare, to soften the impact that was coming. The wheels hit asphalt. The impact was brutal. The main landing gear slammed into asphalt with a force that shattered the suspension struts, sending a shockwave through the entire airframe. The aircraft bounced, 15 feet, 20, then came down again, harder this time. Metal screamed. Something exploded in the rear of the plane. Passengers shrieked. Reverse thrust! John shouted. Now! Mitchell's hands flew to the throttles, reversing both engines. The roar was deafening, a sound like the world ending. The aircraft decelerated violently, throwing everyone forward against their seatbelts. But they were going too fast. The The highway stretched ahead of them, 2 miles suddenly looking like 2 inches. And at the end, the overpass, concrete and steel, immovable and unforgiving. "We're not going to stop in time," Anderson said, his voice eerily calm. John's mind calculated vectors and velocities in microseconds. They were doing 180 knots. The highway was ending. They had maybe 30 seconds before they hit that overpass and everyone died. "Maximum reverse thrust. Everything you've got. We're already at max. Beyond max. Blow the engines if you have to." Mitchell pushed the throttles forward into the red zone, into the area marked with warnings that said catastrophic failure, that said never exceed. The engines screamed in protest, a sound that was almost human in its agony. The deceleration was savage. John felt his body strain against the harness, felt his vision blur at the edges. Behind them, in the cabin, passengers were screaming, crying, praying. Somewhere in that chaos was Owen, his 6-year-old son, experiencing the most terrifying moment of his young life. "Hold on, buddy. Just hold on." The aircraft shook like it was coming apart, because it was coming apart. The overhead bins had burst open completely now, luggage raining down on passengers who were already terrified beyond reason. A window cracked with a sound like a gunshot. The landing gear on the left side collapsed, and the aircraft tilted violently, the wingtip scraping asphalt in a shower of sparks. "We're going to flip," Mitchell shouted. "No, we're not!" John fought the yoke, useless as it was, fought the throttles, fought physics itself. Come on, come on." The right engine exploded, not catastrophically, not yet, but enough that flames were shooting from the cowling, enough that the reverse thrust on that side died completely. The aircraft began to spin, the nose swinging left, the tail whipping around. They were going to hit the overpass sideways. John made a decision in a fraction of a second. He killed the left engine completely, cutting all power. The aircraft stopped spinning, momentum carrying it forward in a straight line again. But now they had no engines, no thrust, no way to slow down except friction and prayer. 150 knots, 140, 130. The overpass loomed ahead, concrete pillars on either side of the highway, the bridge itself maybe 20 feet above the road surface. The aircraft's tail was intact, jutting up from the fuselage. It wouldn't clear. They were going to hit. "Brace!" John shouted into the PA. "Everyone brace now!" 120 knots, 110. The aircraft slid sideways, the collapsed left gear acting like a brake, scraping sparks and molten metal across the asphalt. The right wingtip caught the guardrail, shearing off in a shower of aluminum and composites. 90 knots, 80. The tail section hit the overpass. The sound was apocalyptic, metal on concrete, the shriek of tearing aluminum, the explosive decompression of the rear pressure bulkhead. The entire tail section ripped away, tumbling end over end behind them, taking the last 3 rows of seats with it. John didn't have time to think about who'd been sitting there, didn't have time to calculate casualties. The aircraft was still moving, still sliding forward, and they were past the overpass, but now there was nothing to stop them except the concrete barrier at the end of the highway. 70 knots, 60. Come on, stop, stop. 50 knots, 40. The nose plowed into soft earth beyond the highway, the momentum finally arrested by dirt and grass and the simple physics of friction. The aircraft ground to a halt, tilted at a 45-degree angle. Smoke pouring from both engines. For one perfect, crystalline moment there was silence. Then chaos erupted. "Get out!" John was unbuckling, moving before his conscious mind caught up. "Everybody out! Now!" Anderson was already on the PA. "Evacuate! Evacuate! Leave all belongings and exit the aircraft!" John pushed through the cockpit door into the cabin, and the scene was from a nightmare. Passengers were screaming, some injured, blood on faces and clothes. The oxygen masks dangled uselessly, luggage was everywhere. And there, on the right side of the fuselage, flames were beginning to lick through a crack in the hull. "Move! Move!" John was shouting, pulling people from their seats, pushing them toward the emergency exits. The slides were deploying with explosive pops, people tumbling down them in chaotic streams. He fought his way forward, against the tide of evacuating passengers, toward row 2, toward Owen. The woman in 2A was still in her seat, frozen, her eyes wide and unseeing. Shock. Severe shock. "Ma'am, you need to move." John grabbed her arm, but she didn't respond. He looked at the window seat, and his heart stopped. Owen was slumped in his seat, his oxygen mask askew, blood trickling from his forehead. The flight attendant who'd been watching him was unconscious, slumped in John's seat, a nasty gash across her temple. "Owen!" John lunged across Heather Johnson, his hands finding his son's face. "Owen, buddy, wake up! Wake up!" The boy's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "Daddy? I'm here. I've got you." John unbuckled Owen's seatbelt with shaking hands, lifting his son into his arms. The boy was so light, too light, and that blood on his forehead was still flowing. Behind them, the flames were spreading. John could hear them now, a hungry crackling sound that meant they had maybe 2 minutes before this aluminum tube became an incinerator. He turned to Heather Johnson. "Ma'am, we need to go, now." She didn't move, didn't blink. John made a choice. He couldn't carry both of them. Owen was his son, his responsibility, his whole world. The woman had spent the last hour mocking them, humiliating them, telling them they didn't belong. He could leave her. Should leave her. Save his son and let karma sort out the rest. His feet were already moving toward the exit when Owen's small voice stopped him. "Daddy, the lady, she's still there." John looked down at his son, at those enormous brown eyes that held too much pain and too much goodness. Owen, who'd just survived a plane crash. Owen, who was bleeding and terrified. Owen, who still cared about the woman who'd been cruel to him. "Damn it," John muttered. He turned back, set Owen down in the aisle despite the boy's protests. "Stay right here. Don't move." John grabbed Heather Johnson's arms and yanked her from her seat. She came alive suddenly, gasping, fighting him. "No, no, we're going to die." "Not if you move." John hauled her into the aisle, then scooped Owen back up with one arm, grabbing Heather with the other. "Exit's 10 feet. You can do this. Move." The flames had reached row 4 now, the heat intense enough to blister paint. Smoke was filling the cabin, thick and black and toxic. John pushed Heather toward the emergency exit, where a flight attendant was frantically waving people through. "Go! Jump!" Heather stumbled toward the exit, looked back once at John, then dove through the opening onto the emergency slide. John held Owen tight against his chest and jumped. They hit the slide and tumbled down in a tangle of limbs, landing hard on the grass beside the highway. John rolled, protecting Owen with his body, then came up running, carrying his son away from the aircraft. Behind them, the plane exploded. The fireball rose into the darkening sky, orange and red and furious. The shockwave knocked John to his knees, but he held on to Owen, curled around his son as debris rained down around them. When the roaring finally stopped, John looked up. Emergency vehicles were everywhere, fire trucks, ambulances, police cars with lights flashing. Survivors were scattered across the field, some sitting, some lying down, some just standing and staring at the burning wreckage in disbelief. John looked down at Owen. His son's eyes were open, clear now, focused on his father's face. "We're okay?" Owen whispered. John felt something break inside him. All the fear, all the adrenaline, all the impossible weight of what they'd just survived. He pulled Owen closer and buried his face in his son's hair. "We're okay, buddy. We're okay." The paramedics descended on them like a swarm, separating John from Owen despite his protests. "Sir, you need to let us examine him. That head wound needs attention." "I'm not leaving him. Dad, it's okay." Owen's voice was small but steady. "I'm okay." John reluctantly released his son, watching as they placed Owen on a stretcher, checking his vitals, shining lights in his eyes. The cut on his forehead looked worse than it was. Head wounds always bled dramatically, but John's hands were still shaking as he watched them work. Around him, the scene was controlled chaos. Survivors huddled in groups, wrapped in emergency blankets despite the Alabama heat. Some were crying, some were silent, staring at nothing. A few were on phones, calling loved ones, saying the words nobody ever expects to say. I'm alive. The plane crashed, but I'm alive. John counted heads automatically, his mind running the grim calculus. 186 souls on board. He could see maybe 150, 160 people scattered across the field. The tail section had separated on impact. Those last 3 rows. How many had been sitting there? 9 seats per row, 3 rows, 27 people. His chest tightened. 27 people who hadn't made it because he couldn't stop the aircraft in time. 27 families who would get phone calls tonight, but not the kind they wanted. Captain Luke? John turned. Captain Anderson stood there, soot-streaked and limping, but alive. Behind him, First Officer Mitchell had an arm in an improvised sling, but was on his feet. Hell of a landing, Anderson said quietly. I've been flying for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like that. We lost the tail section. John's voice was flat. How many? Anderson's face went grim. 23 confirmed casualties from the tail. 3 more critically injured who probably won't make it. He paused. But that means 160 people are walking away from a crash that should have killed everyone. You saved 160 lives today, Captain. John looked at the burning wreckage, at the scattered survivors, at his son being bandaged by paramedics. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who'd barely kept his promise. Captain Luke, a woman's voice sharp and authoritative. John turned to see a police officer approaching, accompanied by a man in a suit who had FAA written all over him. I'm Lieutenant Dawson, Alabama State Police. This is Inspector Chen from the NTSB. We need to ask you some questions. My son is being well taken care of, Inspector Chen interrupted. But we need to understand what happened up there, right now, while the details are fresh. For the next 20 minutes, John walked them through it. The hydraulic failure, the decision to use differential thrust, the highway landing. His voice was mechanical, professional, falling back into the patterns of military debriefings. Report the facts, no emotion, no speculation. You said your former Navy? Chen was taking notes. FA-18 pilot? Yes, sir. 94 combat missions. Resigned my commission 3 years ago. And you just happened to be on this flight? I was taking my son to visit his grandmother. She's dying. We had 3 days to get there. John's voice cracked slightly. Now I don't know if we'll make it in time. Chen's expression softened fractionally. We'll do what we can to expedite things. But Mr. Luke, Captain Luke, what you did today was extraordinary. I've investigated hundreds of crashes. Most of them end with everyone dead. You gave 160 people their lives back. John nodded, unable to speak. Because what Chen didn't understand was that those 160 people weren't anonymous statistics. They were the businessman who'd been trying to get home to his kids. The elderly woman with the rosary, the flight attendants who'd stayed calm under impossible pressure, and they were Heather Johnson. John looked across the field and found her. She was sitting on the ground, still wrapped in an emergency blanket, staring at her hands. No phone, no perfectly composed facade. Just a woman who'd looked death in the face and barely survived. Excuse me, John said to the investigators. I need to check on someone. He crossed the field, his legs unsteady. Now that the adrenaline was fading, he could feel every impact, every bruise, every strained muscle. He was going to be impossibly sore tomorrow, if there was a tomorrow. If Owen's grandmother was still alive, if they could get to Montgomery. Ms. Johnson. Heather looked up, and John almost didn't recognize her. The perfect makeup was gone, streaked with tears and soot. Her expensive suit was torn and dirty. Her hair hung in tangled strands around her face. She looked human, vulnerable, real. You came back for me, she said quietly. You could have left me, should have left me, after what I said, after how I... Her voice broke. You came back. John sat down beside her, exhaustion pulling at his bones. My son wanted me to. Owen. She said his name carefully, like it was fragile. Is he... He's okay. Cut on his forehead. Probably a concussion, but he's okay. John looked at her. What about you? I don't know. Heather's hands were shaking. I don't know anything anymore. I thought... She laughed. A broken sound. I thought I knew everything. Thought I had it all figured out. Success, power, control. And then the plane fell out of the sky and none of it mattered. None of it. She turned to face him fully. I spent an hour telling you that you were worthless, that you didn't belong, that your son was a problem and you were a failure. And then you saved my life. You saved all of us. Why? Because it was the right thing to do. But I wasn't right. I was cruel. Vicious. I looked at you and your son and saw everything I thought was wrong with the world. People who didn't measure up to my standards. People who didn't deserve to be where I was. Tears were streaming down her face now. I'm a monster. You're human, John said quietly. You made mistakes. We all do. Not like this. Not... She gestured at the burning wreckage. At the survivors. At everything. You lost people in that tail section. I saw them loading the bodies. 23 people are dead, and I'm alive because you saved me. Me. The woman who spent an hour destroying you. John didn't have an answer for that. Because she was right. 23 people were dead, and Heather Johnson was alive. There was no fairness in that. No justice. Just random chance and a father who couldn't leave someone behind because his 6-year-old son had asked him not to. Ms. Johnson? Heather, please. After today, I think we can use first names. Heather, what happened on that plane doesn't define you. What you do next, that's what matters. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. I don't even know where to start. Start with this. You're alive. You have a second chance. Most people don't get that. John stood up, his body protesting every movement. Use it wisely. He walked back toward the ambulances, toward Owen, leaving Heather Johnson sitting in the grass with her second chance spread out before her like an unwritten page. Owen was sitting up on the stretcher now, a large bandage on his forehead, holding his teddy bear. When he saw John, his face lit up. Daddy, they said I was really brave. They said most kids would have been crying, but I remembered what you said about being brave. John pulled his son into a careful hug, mindful of injuries. You were so brave, buddy. The bravest. Did we save everyone? The question was innocent, hopeful. John thought about lying, about protecting his son from one more painful truth. But Owen deserved honesty. We saved most of them. Not all. Some people in the back of the plane, they didn't make it. Owen's face fell. Oh. But 160 people are going home tonight because we landed that plane. 160 people get to hug their families and say I love you and have Thanksgiving dinner. That's something, Owen. That's a lot. Is Grandma still alive? The question John had been dreading. He looked at the paramedic. Is there any way we can get to Montgomery tonight? His grandmother is in hospice. She has maybe a day left. The paramedic's face was sympathetic. Sir, your son needs to go to the hospital. That head injury needs to be properly examined. I'm fine, Owen insisted. Please, Daddy. We have to see Grandma. We promised. John looked at his son, this small, brave, impossibly resilient boy who'd just survived a plane crash and was worried about keeping a promise to his dying grandmother. How could he say no to that? Let me make a call, the paramedic said, pulling out her radio. While she talked to someone at the hospital, John noticed a news crew had arrived, cameras and lights and reporters swarming the survivors. One of them spotted John and Anderson talking to the investigators and started walking over. Captain Luke? I'm Jennifer Morrison, WSFA News. Can we get a statement about the crash? No comment. John turned away, but the reporter persisted. Is it true you're a former military pilot? That you took over the controls and landed the plane using only the engines? Other reporters were gathering now, cameras pointed at John, lights in his face. The attention made his skin crawl. Please. I need to be with my son. Is it true the pilot was your son? That you were trying to get to a dying relative? That you saved the lives of 160 people? The questions came rapid fire, overlapping, suffocating. John felt panic rising in his chest, Not the controlled, purposeful panic of flying a dying aircraft, but the chaotic, overwhelming panic of being trapped. "Back off!" Captain Anderson stepped between John and the cameras. "Captain Luke is a hero, but he's also a father whose son was just in a crash. Give the man some space." The reporters reluctantly backed up, but John could see more arriving. This was going to be a media circus. His face would be on every news channel by morning. The privacy he'd carefully constructed for the last 3 years was about to evaporate. "Daddy?" Owen was reaching for him. "Can we go now?" The paramedic came back. "All right, I talked to my supervisor. We can transport you both to Montgomery Regional. They'll examine your son there, and the hospice is only 2 miles from the hospital. But," she fixed John with a stern look, "if the doctors say he needs to stay, he stays. Understood?" "Understood. Thank you." As they loaded Owen into the ambulance, John took one last look at the crash site. The fire was under control now, the flames reduced to smoldering wreckage. Survivors were being loaded into ambulances and buses. Body bags were being lined up near the tail section. 23 people who wouldn't go home, but 160 who would. It would have to be enough. The ambulance ride to Montgomery Regional was a blur of sirens and pain medication. Owen dozed fitfully against John's side. The teddy bear clutched in his small hands. Every bump in the road made John wince, his body finally registering all the abuse it had taken during the crash and landing. His phone, miraculously still intact in his pocket, had 17 missed calls and twice as many texts. His brother, friends from his Navy days, his employer, even people he hadn't spoken to in years, all having seen the news, all wanting to know if he was the John Luke, the hero pilot who'd saved 160 people. He ignored them all. There was only one call that mattered. He dialed the hospice. "Peaceful Transitions Hospice. How may I—" "This is John Luke. My mother-in-law is Patricia Brennan. Room 12. I need to know if she's still—" His voice caught. "If she's still with us." A pause. The sound of typing. "Mr. Luke, yes. Mrs. Brennan is still here. Her condition has deteriorated significantly in the last few hours, but she's holding on. Are you close?" 20 minutes, maybe less. Please." John looked down at Owen, asleep against him. "Please tell her we're coming. Tell her Owen is coming." "I will. Drive safely, Mr. Luke." John almost laughed. He'd just landed a plane with no hydraulics on a highway. Driving safely seemed like the least of his concerns. At the hospital, the doctors were efficient and thorough. Owen had a moderate concussion, a laceration that needed 4 stitches, and bruising along his left side. But no broken bones, no internal injuries, no permanent damage. "He's incredibly lucky," the doctor said, finishing up Owen's discharge paperwork. "Kids are resilient, but surviving a plane crash with injuries this minor? That's remarkable." "Can we go see his grandmother?" John asked. "She's at Peaceful Transitions. She doesn't have much time." The doctor looked at Owen, then at John. "Against my better judgment, yes, but he needs rest. If he shows any signs of dizziness, nausea, confusion, we'll come straight back, I promise." 10 minutes later, they were in a taxi heading to the hospice. Owen was quiet, staring out the window at the Montgomery streets sliding past. It was nearly midnight now. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving had turned into Wednesday morning, and they were running out of time. "Daddy?" Owen's voice was small. "What if Grandma doesn't recognize me?" John's heart broke a little. "She'll recognize you, buddy. You're her grandson. You look just like your mom did when she was little. Will she be scared?" "Because of the plane crash?" "We're not going to tell her about the plane crash. We're just going to tell her we're here, and we love her, and we're glad we made it in time." The hospice was quiet when they arrived, the hallways dimmed for nighttime. A nurse led them to room 12, her footsteps soft on the linoleum. "She's been asking for you," the nurse whispered. "She keeps saying Owen's name." John pushed open the door, and the smell hit him. That distinctive hospice smell of antiseptic and flowers and something else, something indefinable that meant the end was near. Patricia Brennan lay in the hospital bed, impossibly small beneath the white sheets. She'd been a vibrant woman once. John remembered her from the wedding, dancing with his wife, laughing with that same bright laugh that he'd fallen in love with. Cancer had taken that woman and left this fragile shell behind. But when she heard the door open, her eyes fluttered open, and John saw recognition flare there. "Owen," she whispered, "my sweet boy." Owen climbed carefully onto the bed, mindful of the tubes and wires. "Hi, Grandma. We came to see you." Patricia's hand, skeletal and trembling, reached up to touch Owen's face. "You're so big. When did you get so big?" "I'm 6 now, Grandma. Remember? I had a birthday." 6? Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "Your mama was 6 when—" She coughed, a wet, rattling sound that spoke of lungs failing. "When she lost her first tooth. Made me put it under her pillow even though we were at the hospital visiting your grandfather. She was stubborn, your mama." "Daddy says I'm stubborn too," Owen said. "He says I get it from you and Mommy." Patricia laughed, a sound like rustling paper. "Smart man, your daddy." She looked past Owen to John. "You kept your promise. You brought him." "I always keep my promises." John moved closer, resting a hand on Owen's shoulder. "We wanted to be here. Needed to be here." Patricia's gaze sharpened suddenly, focusing on the bandage on Owen's forehead. "What happened? Is he hurt?" "Just a little accident. He's fine. The doctors checked him out. He's going to be fine." But Patricia wasn't fooled. Mothers, even dying mothers, had a sixth sense for these things. "What kind of accident?" John hesitated. He'd planned to keep the crash a secret, to not burden a dying woman with more worry. But Patricia Brennan had earned the truth. "Our plane had some trouble, but we're here. We're safe." "That's all that matters." Patricia's eyes widened. "The news. They've been talking about a plane crash, a highway landing. 160 people survived because the pilot—" She looked at John with new understanding. "That was you." "It doesn't matter." "It matters." Patricia's grip on Owen tightened. "You saved my grandson. You saved yourself. You came here, through all of that, to keep a promise to a dying old woman." "You're not old," Owen said loyally, "and you're the best grandma ever." Patricia's face crumpled, tears streaming down her papery cheeks. "I wanted more time. Wanted to see you grow up, graduate, get married. Wanted to meet your children someday." She looked at John. "Take care of him. He's all that's left of my baby girl." "I will. I promise." They sat with her for 2 hours, talking quietly about Sarah, about memories, about all the small moments that make up a life. Owen told her about school, about his friends, about the teddy bear she'd given him that he still slept with every night. Patricia listened, her breathing growing shallower, her responses coming slower. Finally, as the clock approached 3 a.m., she squeezed Owen's hand one last time. "I'm going to see your mama now," she whispered. "She's been waiting for me. I can feel her." "Tell her I love her," Owen said, his voice breaking. "Tell her I miss her every day." "I will, sweet boy. I will." Patricia Brennan closed her eyes and didn't open them again. The monitors began to alarm, but John knew before the nurses arrived. He could feel it, that absence, that shift from presence to memory. Owen buried his face in John's chest and cried, not the hysterical crying of a child, but the deep, grieving sobs of someone who understood loss. John held him, rocking slowly, his own tears falling silently into his son's hair. They'd made it, kept the promise, said goodbye. It would have to be enough. 3 days later, John stood in a cemetery in Montgomery, watching them lower Patricia Brennan into the ground beside her daughter. Owen held his hand, silent and solemn in a suit they'd bought at a thrift store because everything they'd packed had burned in the plane. The funeral was small, a few of Patricia's friends from the hospice, a cousin from Florida, Captain Anderson and First Officer Mitchell, who'd flown down on their own dime to pay respects, and, surprisingly, Heather Johnson. She stood at the back, apart from the others, wearing jeans and a simple black sweater, nothing like the armor of expensive suits she'd worn on the plane. When the service ended and people began to disperse, she approached slowly, hesitantly. I hope it's okay that I came, she said quietly. I know I have no right. It's fine, John said. He meant it. Heather knelt down to Owen's eye level. I owe you an apology, a real one. What I said on that plane, about you, about your father, it was cruel and wrong. You're a brave, good kid, and your dad is a hero. I was too blind to see it. Owen studied her for a moment, then nodded. It's okay. Daddy says everyone makes mistakes. Your daddy is a wise man. Heather stood, looking at John. I've been doing a lot of thinking since the crash. About my life. About who I've become. I built an empire by stepping on people. By convincing myself that compassion was weakness and success meant being harder than everyone else. She pulled an envelope from her purse. This is a check. Enough to cover your business class tickets, and then some. Enough to... I don't want your money, John said. It's not charity. It's... Heather's voice cracked. It's me trying to do one decent thing. You saved my life. You came back for me when you could have left me to burn. The least I can do is help you get back on your feet. John looked at the envelope, then at Owen. His son was watching him with those enormous brown eyes, waiting to see what his father would do. Keep your money, John said finally. But if you really want to do something decent, start with the people who work for you, the ones you fired before lunch and called it operational efficiency. The ones who are struggling just like I am. Be better to them. That's what would matter. Heather's eyes filled with tears. She nodded slowly. I will. I promise. She left them there in the cemetery, walking away with her second chance clutched close. The media attention was relentless. By the end of the week, John's face was on every news channel, every website, every newspaper. Hero pilot saves 160 lives. Former Navy ace lands plane on highway. Single dad's impossible choice. The interviews were exhausting. Everyone wanted the story, the dramatic moment, the fear, the triumph. But John kept it simple. He'd done what needed to be done, nothing more, nothing less. What surprised him were the calls that came after. Defense contractors who'd heard about his skills, airlines offering training positions, even the Navy, asking if he'd consider returning to service. But it was a different call that changed everything. Mr. Luke? This is Richard Vance from Vance Aviation Technologies. We're a startup developing next-generation flight control systems. I've been following your story, and I have a proposition for you. John listened as Vance outlined his offer, a consulting position, designing redundancy systems, and emergency protocols for commercial aircraft, the kind of work that would use John's skills, that would matter, that would save lives. And it was remote, flexible, allowing him to be home for Owen every night. The salary was 3 times what he made driving trucks. Why me? John asked. Because you understand what it means when systems fail. You've been there, you've lived it. You know what pilots need when everything goes wrong. That's invaluable. Vance paused. Plus, frankly, having Captain Falcon 6 consulting on our safety systems is the kind of credibility money can't buy. John took the job. 2 weeks later, on a cold December morning, John stood in Owen's school gymnasium watching his son accept an award for exceptional courage from the principal. The boy walked up to the podium, still small for his age, still carrying that teddy bear everywhere, and spoke into the microphone. My teacher asked me to talk about being brave, Owen said, his voice steady. And I thought about it a lot. Being brave isn't not being scared. I was really scared on that plane. I was scared when Grandma died. I'm scared a lot, actually. The audience laughed softly. But my dad taught me that being brave means you do the right thing even when you're scared. You help people even when it's hard. You come back for people even when they're mean to you. Owen looked out at the crowd until he found John. My dad is the bravest person I know. Not because he landed a plane, because every day he gets up and takes care of me even though he misses my mom and it's hard and he's tired. That's what brave really is. John felt his throat tighten. Around him, parents were dabbing at their eyes. After the ceremony, they walked out to the parking lot together. John had traded in his old truck for something more reliable. Nothing fancy, but it ran, and the heat worked, and Owen's car seat was installed properly for the first time in years. "Dad," Owen said as John buckled him in, "do you think Mom and Grandma saw me get that award?" John looked up at the sky, clear and blue and infinite. "Yeah, buddy. I think they did." "Do you think they're proud?" "I know they are." John closed the door and walked around to the driver's side. As he started the engine, his phone buzzed. A text from Heather Johnson. "Just wanted you to know I reinstated everyone I fired. Starting an employee assistance fund, too. Thank you for showing me there's a better way." John smiled and put the phone away. They drove through Montgomery, past the highway where Pacific 447 had come to rest, where 23 people had lost their lives and 160 had been given another chance. Past the hospice where promises had been kept. Past the cemetery where two women who'd loved Owen rested side by side. "Where are we going?" Owen asked. "I thought maybe we'd get lunch somewhere nice. Celebrate your award." "Can we get burgers? The fancy kind with the good fries?" "We can get whatever you want, little man." "Even dessert?" "Even dessert." Owen grinned, the first genuine, uncomplicated smile John had seen on his son's face in weeks, maybe months. It was the smile of a kid who'd been through hell and somehow come out the other side still believing good things were possible. John reached back and squeezed Owen's hand. "Hey, buddy." "Yeah, Dad. I'm proud of you, too. Every single day." "I know, Dad, I know." They pulled into the parking lot of a diner, one of those classic American places with chrome trim and vinyl booths and a jukebox in the corner. As they walked inside, John thought about the woman on the plane who'd told him he didn't belong in business class, who'd looked at his worn clothes and struggling son and seen failure. She'd been wrong. He belonged exactly where he was, walking into a diner with his son, both of them alive against impossible odds, both of them carrying scars but still standing. He belonged in the job that would let him save lives without leaving Owen behind. He belonged in this new chapter they were writing together. The waitress smiled as they slid into a booth. "What can I get you folks?" Owen ordered a cheeseburger with extra pickles. John ordered coffee and whatever the special was. And as they waited for their food, Owen pulled out a piece of paper and some crayons the waitress had brought. "What are you drawing?" John asked. "A plane," Owen said, his tongue poking out in concentration. "But not a scary one. A good one. One where everyone gets home safe." John watched his son draw, this small, brave, impossibly resilient boy who'd survived a plane crash and said goodbye to his grandmother and still believed in good planes and happy endings. Maybe that was the real victory. Not the 160 lives saved or the recognition or the new job, but this, a 6-year-old boy who'd been through trauma and loss and still chose to draw a plane that got everyone home safe. Still chose hope. "That's a good plane, buddy," John said softly. "That's a really good plane." Owen looked up and smiled. "Just like the one you flew, Dad. Just like the one I flew." Outside, the December sun broke through the clouds, painting the diner windows in shades of gold. Inside, a father and son ate burgers and drew pictures and planned a future that neither of them had been sure they'd have. And somewhere up above the clouds, John liked to think 2 women were watching, smiling, knowing that the boys they'd loved were going to be okay, not because the journey had been easy, but because they'd faced it together, and that, in the end, was all that mattered. If you were in John's position, facing someone who'd humiliated you and your child just moments before, would you have gone back to save them? What does it truly mean to do the right thing when every instinct tells you to walk away? Please share your thoughts below. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as beautiful and intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share, as this helps us to create more beautiful stories. See you on the next one.